Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Moritz Bierling here, and he is the community lead at Daylight Computer, and he wears many hats there. And so, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. Pleasure to be here.
So let's go right into the question of the future of computation, the future of computing. It was actually really interesting. While we were doing some tests beforehand, I opened up the file that Zoom gives me, and it immediately opened up the iTunes or not the software that Apple built for their music and for all their audio that's set to the default by Apple. And I've been doing this podcast with my dad called Stuart Squared, where we go back into the history of the PC industry and building computers, and with Steve Jobs and all these interesting figures. And one thing I've learned from him is that Steve Jobs was a total control freak and basically built the Apple so that he could have end-to-end control over everything inside of the company. And many people have noticed that their software kind of sucks. And so their software kind of sucks, even though their hardware is great and some of their software works. But so this music program that automatically got uploaded, it doesn't play the file immediately. So it opens a piece of software, and then I'm just left there for 30 seconds until I realize the horrible nature of this particular piece of software, which gets into what we want to talk about, which is like I've got this computer in front of me. It can do all these things, really interesting things, but it's also connected to the internet and it's a distraction machine. And you guys are building this other type of computer that I can go outside with, which is a big thing that I want to start doing more of. I want to start doing more interviews while I'm walking around, potentially in Patagonia. And so, what is Daylight Computer and how does it fit into the ramble I just went on?
Very well, I would say. The initial inspiration for even doing this in the first place was that the founder, Anjan, a good personal friend of mine, and in fact, a friend of mine before I became a part of this company, uh, he he just realized how much technology was both an indispensable lifeline that makes you part of society and work life and all these things that allow you to have a meaningful existence today, but also an incredible impediment to an actually felt sense of well-being, given its nature of blue light, of this kind of very distracting feel that a lot of the software platforms and social media platforms and also the operating systems themselves can tend to have. They're not necessarily built to sustain us in the long-term intentions that we may hold for our lives. They're built to initially serve as a kind of appliance, really. A lot of the initial computers were sold as kind of better calculators or VisiCalc, like do your spreadsheets on this. And then they became over time a kind of messy middle of a whole bunch of different tools that you can make use of. And then have arrived today in a state where they are essentially now just portals into these digital casinos that we interact with most of our day. I think the latest statistics on how much people spend time on these things for little purpose other than to like pull the digital kind of one-armed jack of Twitter or Instagram or TikTok is I think 6 hours plus per day, depending on which populations you talk about. And so this is not just an inevitable conclusion of computing as such. It's a particular developmental path that computing has gone down, partially due to historical accidents, like, for example, the display technology that was picked or that survived, rather, whether it was marketable, partially because of the nature of the internet and how the server client architecture makes certain kinds of business models more successful than others, and a whole host of other reasons. And so Anjan, when he found himself consistently depressed, especially in the winter when it's
Mm.
even harder to be in the daylight or sunlight, um,
Uh,
he would find himself just up until 4 a.m., 5 a.m. on his computer, opening 100 different tabs and kind of impulsively going down these rabbit holes that hold the attention of somebody who's intensely curious and who, by the very nature of the internet's branching kind of structure, has a very hard time containing that impulse. And the one kind of refuge or sanctuary that provided him that sense of difference was the Kindle, really.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The Kindle being this, well, kind of reading, again, kind of a computer, again, built for a particular specific purpose, reading, right? And also built with a different display technology, specifically e-ink. And so this display, he was asking himself, why does this Kindle make me feel different? Why does it register for me differently than the rest of my computing environment does? And a big part of it is the screen, but a big part of it is also that the nature of the screen being more visible in direct light because it is reflective rather than emissive
Uh,
allows him to be spend more time outside. And so there's a whole other uh, panoply of sequences of events that happened from there. Like then he was one of the earliest adopters of the remarkable and tried to
what is
kind
the
of hack the
remarkable?
remarkable. It's another tablet that you
Hmm.
can actually sketch also on and write, and
Uh,
it is a very fast e-ink
uh-huh.
display
Uh-huh.
where
Uh-huh.
the latency between you moving your pen on it and it showing the stroke is very, very low. And so it gives you a very physical, tangible feel of interacting with a kind of sheet of paper, but in the digital realm. Um, and so when that initially came out, he attempted to hack it and create software for it that was better than the shitty one that they distributed it with. And that also didn't work. And so he went down all of these rabbit holes of how these screens work. And oh, e-ink is not just the only type of
Oh,
e-paper,
cool.
which is the
What are
general
the other types?
category. There's other ones as well. There's I think phoretic displays and all these other ones. I'm actually not a display engineer, and I
Yeah.
didn't go down that rabbit hole as much, so I have a
Uh-huh.
harder time speaking about that with expertise. But the particular screen that we now have in our data computer, which is a tablet, and that he spent the better part of 6 to 7 years develop
Wow.
with his friends and kind of going down these arcane research rabbit holes that some Japanese professors had refused to give up on after the initial success of the Game Boy Advance in the 90s. Um,
Wow. That's a story.
he,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he ended up creating a display that made a number of different trade-offs that actually enabled this uh, RLCD or reflective LCD or transflective LCD technology that the Game Boy kind of has some lineage for. Made a bunch of different trade-offs that made it actually so much more fluid, so much more uh, competitive, at least in terms of dynamism with the emissive displays that dominate the industry today. That an actual new kind of tool or computer or device was possible that gives us some of the dynamism that we are used to and that we enjoy in the regular internet, like watching videos or scrolling pages, right? Like you can't really scroll pages as easily on e-ink displays because they have a much lower refresh rate, which means that they stutter and then they have these ghosting issues. And so when you want to have a kind of a good experience of using a computer and also focusing on the activity that you're actually going to the computer for, then a e-paper display has a lot of advantages, but e-ink doesn't suffice unless you're doing something that doesn't have that dynamism, like for example, just reading pages, which is what these things are very good at. So that's kind of a bit
Mm.
of the backstory to Data Computer and to Anjan's kind of origin story in creating this technology, this computer, and then also this company. And yeah, that's kind of how we got here. And my involvement in this really came about as a consequence of meeting Anjan at the height of the 2020 pandemic in an online kind of, well, the STOA. It's this online
Uh-huh.
community that provided a semblance of kind of belonging in an otherwise very disconnecting time.
Uh,
And on one of the salons they had, a friend of mine, Christopher Life, kind of presented about his political project of bringing an independent party to the United States. Um, and
uh,
and at the time it was called One Nation. And Anjan asked very good and very pointed questions at my friend, and I then ended up kind of bridging these gaps of understanding or perspective. And then he and I bonded over that, and over the course of that summer, I ended up having hours and hours long conversations each weekend. And later on, I became part of the company, and yeah.
Very cool. there's a lot we can go up. First, I want to share a funny thing that I just made. Going back to the earlier part of what you were talking about, there is I just made a meme that was slot machines and replaced by slop
Very
machine.
good.
Uh,
Yes,
and that's what our modern day internet is what that's basically what's going on there. And that relates to the next question. So there it's not only so there's the blue light, which is a big thing. And so removing the blue light from our interactions, it reminds me of the sci-fi. The sci-fi kind of consensus was that we're going to end up with sort of holographic UIs that just, we have this AI and the AI, we can talk to the AI, but we need to see something. It'll kind of be in a holographic or sort of like like a paper that isn't paper. It's like a digital screen that we interact with like paper. And so this feels like a thing that was left out of that sci-fi vision, which was related to the other things that were left out of the sci-fi vision, which is nobody predicted the sort of slop machine type of future we're in right now with the Facebook and the Instagram and all these guys just trying to the best and brightest all trying to of the world trying to figure out how to addict you to these ridiculous simulations, which is going to get much worse with the AI stuff. And so you guys built this computer, and there's the blue light element of it. But what about the computing? Because you guys actually figured out a way to do high functional computing with gestures and all these different things. So the distraction part, my main issue with the internet is that it's open, so that I can go, I'm working on something, I want to get it done, and then I have these moments where I kind of disconnect. And and I think that disconnection is important. I'm not like I think it's good to move away from what I'm working with. So I think, but automatically the I go to Twitter, I go to Facebook, I go to all those different things. I know a lot of people have developed sort of Chrome blockers and all those things, but they all feel really artificial. And so what I really want is a computer that is not connected to those things, but is connected to an LLM. And so that's my main, because the LLM allows me to use the internet in a way that I want to for this thing or do all the other tangential things, but doesn't have me go to Twitter and doesn't have me go to the social media. Are you guys doing this? What's your relationship to LLMs?
oh yeah, big question. I mean, we published a little sneak peek into our internal experimentation with AI, I think at the beginning of this year or late last year, that essentially was a small win that we think we can implement fairly easily in the device as is right now. And that is, well, just for context, the data computer is essentially an Android tablet.
Okay.
At
Cool.
launch, it was distributed with a Niagara launcher, which is a kind of a way to create a sleek, clean user interface for people. We are going to replace that launcher fairly soon with our own version, and so right now
So
you're actually
it won't
seeing
be Android anymore,
it
or
will still be Android. It's just too impossible or too resource intensive to create an entire operating system from scratch.
yes. Yeah.
But over time, we will morph this more and more
Oh,
into our
that's
own
cool.
thing, which we
Yeah,
call
yeah,
Solo S.
yeah,
And so, actually, what you see right now on my screen here is
yeah.
kind of the internal software update that we haven't yet distributed to our user base.
Very cool.
And it's very simple right now. It just has a kind of wallpaper background. It has a left bar kind of on the side, which has your main apps for this particular space. It has the time and the date, and that's essentially it. And then if I swipe into either direction, it goes into a different space that has a different name, that has different app presets that I selected for it. And so the idea here is, of course, that in order for me to do the things I want to do on this without distraction, I probably want to have some high level distinction between what I'm actually there to do, what is my intent, and then what are the affordances that most reliably allow me to do and to deliver on that intent. And so this is a very simple affordance that we've implemented so far, and I quite enjoy it. I haven't used it that much actually right now. I set up for success, but I find myself mostly just staying in one space. But you can see all kinds of interesting patterns of use from this. Like, for example, right now I have it set up so that I have one kind of what do I call it? Is it workspace? Well, I have that kind of rise space, which is like kind of waking up. There's a flow space. There's a dive space, kind of like research, and then an unwind space, which is
Hmm.
kind of like when I go to bed,
I like
right?
this. So
Yes.
this is, and I love the distinction you made there between the hardware and the software. It does totally make sense to go to Android first because nobody wants to rebuild an OS. But I think as AI gets better and better, we will be able to rebuild OSs on the fly, and I think that's a really weird future that'll open up. But you just mentioned something really interesting, which is gets to my distraction point, which is that you essentially create spaces that are for various different vibes, I would say. Um, Now, like, who is on the team so far, if you can share? Like, like, is it that you did this crazy, building a computer, which I would also love to talk about. I imagine there's a lot of learnings there, institutional learnings about how to go build a new computer, which is something I think is really important because we need to build a new phone as well. Actually, maybe you guys are working on that as well. And so, what is the team right now? Is it mostly hardware, mostly software? What's going on there?
Yeah, I'll tell in just a moment. I'll finish the arc I was on, which is the AI question, which is uh, we have these spaces, and then we also developed our own proprietary reader app. So essentially, an app that is like a kind of save later app. Like you save it in your browser or on your share
Very
sheet
cool.
on your iPhone or Android or wherever you are. You can put PDFs, EPUBs, etc. on it, and then you can consume or read or engage
Very
rather
cool.
with rather than consume these in this app. And so that's like the one app, the dedicated app that we created so far. And so the AI experiment that we did and that we talked about online briefly was this kind of AI feature where we have physical buttons, and two of these are kind of action buttons. One is kind of at the bottom right of the screen, or like to the or the bezel rather, and then I guess I can show it like here, and then one is here at the top on the left. And so the idea is you're reading something, you encounter something you want to know more about, you want to kind of like go deeper on, and you press the button without even leaving the screen, and you engage the AI in a conversation, whether it be by voice, probably most easy modality, or by typing or whatever it may be, if you can switch also between these. And then you can have a conversation about the context of what is on the screen right now, right? And so that's something that we will also share when we go further. But yeah, that's the first kind of concrete, pragmatic exploration of AI. We have many other ideas we want to continue to develop. We definitely think of what we're building as a kind of AI native kind
Yeah.
of thing, or something that can make use of those affordances. But we also want to do this tastefully and respectfully. I don't. I think there's a uh, an easy temptation to essentially supplant the human cognitive capabilities with these easy answers or easy access to this kind of external intelligence. And so we don't want to fall either into the trap of paternalism nor into the trap of kind of full accelerationism and distraction. And
Mm.
so the way we grapple with that question is by uh, intending to move into open sourceness more
Yeah.
and more over time, right? So right now the tablet isn't locked to our operating system. You can actually install other ones, and we actively support a community project called datahacker.wiki, which is a website where you can find kind of a growing collection of instructions for how to make it your own, whether it be by
Mm.
putting on a different operating system or by like what maybe certain kinds of good apps are, or there's all kinds of space for what you can meaningfully do under that banner. But that's an idea. And then that I think allowed us also to, with integrity, pursue opinionated
Mm.
design choices in our own operating system and essentially say, look, if you don't like these, you're always free to make a different selection for what better serves your purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I've been reading Eric S. Raymond's book, which is The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which is sort of the initial open source handbook on what is open source, what is it not. And then I'm constantly faced with the fact that Anki is the worst piece of technology I've ever used, which is for the spaced repetition, and it's open source. And so I'm like, okay, so I get it. Linux, yeah, you can do open source, you can build good open source software for programmers using the Linux with the open source development framework. But Anki just totally missed the boat on a good piece of software. And so there, it sounds like you guys did some sort of middle ground where it's like a open source software type of thing. You're already using Android, which is the open source thing, which brings to mind going and investigating how Google landed on that open source, but that is a tangent for another time. So we LLMs, yeah, spaced repetition. What imagine a lot of people are into spaced repetition based on what you just described, right? Who are using this or
Sure, I think there's probably a bunch of people who would meaningfully use this as a premier device for doing that. I think the larger question of learning as such is interesting for this. I mean, part of or the inspiration or another source of inspiration and a part of the vision as well for this is to act as a kind of primer or primer. If you're familiar with the Diamond Age or the Young
Mm.
Ladies Illustrated Primer
No, no, no.
by Neil
Please go into
Stephenson.
that. What is it?
Well, it's a novel, a science fiction novel that has this notion, the central notion of a kind of a magical book, if you will, or like a device that is that every well, I think in that context, like high society kid that has access to, and then I think like a low society kid gets access to one of these, and essentially what its function is to serve as your kind of dedicated mentor that perfectly creates the lessons for your situation that you're in the form that you're actually capable
Great,
of
great, great.
adopting them. And so, yeah, this device I think would be a premier platform on which to do those kinds of things, whether it be an app or whether it be like the thing itself with the OS also arranged to support that. I mean, we
Mm,
have ideas about knowledge graphs, we have ideas
mm.
about like annotating things, like we have ideas about like invoking these AIs potentially and many more things. So yeah, definitely there's a whole lot of things that become possible when you are doing both software and hardware.
Mm,
And
mm.
I think there's this famous Alan Kay quote, which is the people who are serious about software should do their own hardware. It's just that hardware is really,
So much
really,
hard.
really hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard, and this is also why a lot of people go into software, or
Yeah. Yeah.
why so little few people go into hardware because it's just so hard, and not just on the technological side, but also on the organizational and business side. Because if you make wrong decisions in that context, you actually like just one wrong decision can kill the entire company at an early stage because you fail to like get enough volume or enough customers, or you make the wrong like processor choice or whatever it may be. So we definitely face those kinds of challenges as well.
So I'm now getting my first step into getting into hardware. I'm showing you for those listeners. So I've got a Raspberry Pi that I just ordered. That's like the $20 one. And so my experience with vibe coding, I'm not a professional developer, but I'm now vibe coding, building software for myself. And so I was like, okay, well, how is this going to work for the hardware? So I got a Raspberry Pi. I still haven't turned it on yet, but once I get the micro SD card, I'm gonna get into that. And I mean, so let's get like how much of the team is hardware, how much of the team is software, and like what did you guys learn about the hardware side?
Right. I it's interesting. We the company itself goes through lots of changes, and right now our hardware team is very, very small. Like, well, we don't really have a dedicated hardware team at the moment. Essentially, the initial work that was necessary to create the device is completed, and
Yeah.
now we're like doing further developmental work
But
for
you're still doing
potential.
manufacturing though, right? You're
Yes, we
doing
are
hardware
still we are
manufacturing, but not hardware
yeah, we are
development.
still
Got it. Yeah.
manufacturing. We have like our OEM, which is like the manufacturing provider. Like there's all these like entities that are part of that. There's the display manufacturer, and so yeah, we're still of course dealing with hardware, but we're not. Uh, we designed the device, and then the device was manufactured, and so right now the hardware team is very small or not non-existent. We are putting energies into further product development. People are clamoring for a phone, of course. The challenge with that is that it's like 10 to 100 times harder than a tablet because
Whoa.
of the miniaturization you have to do.
The miniature
Um,
what?
Miniaturization, like all the
Oh,
components that you
oh,
do in a tablet, you have to miniaturize them, and that's
wow.
extraordinary, like magnitudes more expensive and difficult. And so, yeah. And then we also, of course, want to give it our own real like taste and feel and actually have something that has a difference from what exists out there. So yeah, we will do that. The question is when. So that remains to be seen. We also, of course, are looking into uh, iterations on the device as it exists. We also have ideas about doing, for example, whiteboard-like surfaces or any number of other kinds of computational surfaces, let's say.
Wow.
And so there's a whole ecosystem of telemetry or of devices possible. And then that is kind of the low-hanging fruit of a computer company. Well, maybe not so low, um, but really what our DNA, I think, is at the core, and what Anjan emphasizes again and again, is that we're not really a computer company, even though we're called Data Computer. We're more thinking of ourselves as an environmental design company,
Mm,
because one of the things that is the problem with the computing environment as it exists today is that it's essentially a evolutionary mismatch between humans and the tools that they
yeah,
create.
yeah,
Like the
yeah,
the tools are not created with an eye to the cognitive,
yeah,
physiological, and other ergonomics that humans do well with. And so the tablet that we created is a a first possible step that kind of gives us enough leverage and gives enough people who use it the leverage to then do all kinds of other possible changes. And so I think that the biggest leverage that gives people is that uh, it allows them to go outside, really, because and this is also why the data at computer name makes so much
hmm
sense to me
hmm
and why I think it's so valuable. And we are actually right now preparing a kind of summer campaign around this idea of the outdoor computing club. Um, that the reason that makes sense and why it's so apt is that humans are evolved with the sun as the single most reliable indicator of their environmental context or
Yes.
environmental yeah, source of certainty.
Yeah.
Um, and so our whole physiology depends on the light signaling from the sun to coordinate the biological processes that take place
Yeah.
in us.
Yeah.
And so when we remove ourselves from that signal, uh, we actually disrupt all manner of processes in our system, which ends up dysregulating our hormones, our cognitive systems, and so on. And so there's an interesting historical kind of cycling that we humans tend to go through as societies, which is we live in the environment as such and with some affordances that we create in kind of in our environment to sustain ourselves. And then as we increasingly are successful in organizing our environment to meet our needs,
Mm.
we create kind of
False
collective
things or
exoskeletons
yeah. Oh,
that
interesting.
that that then end up being between us and the sun. Like if you think about buildings as
Yeah.
kind of an external shell,
Ooh, I like
uh,
that.
and then computers as these kind of glowing rectangles that draw us inside more and more. It's essentially we've been tempted into Plato's cave once again, and the question is, do we have it in us to exit it again?
Yeah. I love it. There's so much to go on there. The solar punk, very solar punk vibes. My listeners probably are very familiar with the solar punk aesthetic because we've talked about it a bunch. But Burning Man, it's a Burning Man aesthetic. It's not a cyberpunk novel series. We have so many literary examples of cyberpunk. I could only find one literary example of solar punk, and it was a very strange book from the 1970s that if I can go find if anybody's ever curious about what that book was. But very strange book. But the aesthetic itself is really interesting. Solar punk, my understanding is just like this aesthetic that instead of like cyberpunk is like we get more and more technology. It gets like what you're saying. It's just like we keep on building these distracting ridiculousness. And we get trapped in it, and we have all this amazing technology, but it doesn't solve any of our really functional problems as a human species. Um,
Right.
and then, but the solar punk is like, well, what happens if we do solve all of our functional problems and we live with solar panels and we go out and but it's not a utopia. I mean, some aspects of solar punk are definitely utopian, but it's not a utopia because we will always have our existential problems of we die, like things are going away, everything will collapse, like all that's real. And Brian Johnson's creating his Don't Die. And although I respect him for doing his things, it's like a totally ridiculous goal because it's not going to work and there's a bunch of bullshit and wrapped in it. But so solar punk. And then the other thing I was thinking that you got your summer campaign in an outdoor computer club, and definitely down in Argentina, there's a lot of opportunities for that. So Argentina on its flag has the Incan sun god. on it, which is really interesting. And it also your talk also reminded me about Mithras and the Roman
Sun cult.
cult.
Yep.
Yeah, the sun cult, exactly. And it's like, oh, we're headed back there. But it goes back to what I really liked about what you said, which is that you're not back 20 minutes ago, which is that you're not going after full accelerationism. I think full accelerationism is the bad side of the sun god cult. Like it's like the like let's become the machine. And I think there's a balance there, and I think it's like the opposite end, basically. Anything to say there?
Yeah, I mean, Anjan has written a kind of uh, internal document that he distributes to the people that most understand the motivation for this and the longer term vision. And it's kind of a living manifesto. And in it, he describes, and we make more and more use of this over time, this idea of three different timelines. And so there's the first timeline, which is the kind of Ted Kaczynski Unabomber, like primitivism, go back to nature, fuck all this technology kind of direction. And it's very alluring when you get overwhelmed with the complexities that seem to serve no purpose, or rather seem to serve the purpose of frustrating our actual lived experience and good lives. Um, and then there's the second timeline, which is the kind of Mark Andreessen techno optimist, like technology will solve everything timeline, which we also think is not the right route to go down, or at least in its extreme version, isn't going to give us what the people who think it's the right way to go
Yeah.
think it will give us things. So
Yeah.
the question then is what is the third timeline, the timeline where neither of these went out, and there's a balance between human and nature and technology. What does that third timeline look like? And it's not that we have an answer for that, but we do think it has to somehow involve this kind of uh, notion of whole or holism or right relationship. And there the computing kind of landscape is currently the one where we have some measure of capacity to affect what that looks like, and to wrest back uh, some semblance of human autonomy and choice, to then more directly again reinvest that what that is wrest back into making further advances. And so actually I'm kind of interested in exploring more the artistic and intellectual side of, like, how do you provide glimpses into that third timeline? Like I have ideas for like working with artists where people might make kind of a comic or a movie script, or other kinds of things that make this feel real to people. I myself have actually written like a little movie script that I think communicates this in some way. And I think this is where the daylight computer is also somewhat different from typical startups or tech companies.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we have the outward form of a tech company, but underneath it, or around and inside it, is more of a kind of mycelial organismic uh, 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 thing, where, like, I, for example, am a good example of this. I was inside the company's membrane three separate times. This is my third time being inside of it, and I've been out of it when the circumstances of the company's existence required me to depart, whether it like ran out of money, or like I had other things to do, or so there is more of a kind of social fabric that exists behind the veneer of the tech company, that I think gives this a life that is beyond the corporate objective, let's say. And I think there's also an open area of experimentation where I think it's quite important to have relationships with people that work in like organizational design, or in for example, Arthur Brock with currency design. Like I've lots of ideas about how to build those kinds of ideas into things we do. So there's more of a directionality of building an ecology of organisms and infrastructures and tools and so on, than us becoming like a monolith that becomes a competitor to Apple or Google or Microsoft in that sense. And so I think we also will have the opportunity, because we're approaching it in this different and less kind of conquer the world way, to make smaller bets, and make smaller bets for more niche audience as well. Like one of the criticisms that we get quite consistently, especially from the kind of tech reviewer audience, and why we didn't work with so many at the beginning, is that they evaluate the value of our product through the narrow lens of like computing speed, or oh, it doesn't have a billion colors, or but the thing we're trying to do is so much not capturable in the mere numbers of what the specs are, and it's actually quite well understood by people who have a direct need for what this thing provides them, is a kind of good relationship with their intention and the capacity to block out noise and to more and more sculpt to the informational environment in the direction of travel that feels most interesting and meaningful to them.
So there's a lot we can go into there. I loved the framing of the three different timelines. You got one with Ted Kaczynski, you got Mark Andreessen on the other one, and you got, this other one, which is unclear. And it reminds me of basically the last 2,000 years of history, which have been very, very binary. It's like you're in or you're out. You believe in the God or you don't, and it's just like constantly like that. And the tech world is very much like the out branch of that. And in that outbranching has basically created the mushroom rhizomatic structure, which you're talking about, which like Deleuze, if people want to understand where this comes from, is from Deleuze and from Nick Land. Nick Land brought a lot of Deleuze into his theories and also was sort of responding to Ted Kaczynski. So it's all sort of like a mixture there. But this timeline is really interesting because now we're in the rhizomatic. So we're in this mushroom-like structure. An example, I reach out to you guys on Twitter, direct relationship. There's no intermediary. If you thought about like what I would have to do back 30 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. So what is this Third Timeline Research Institute? Oh, that's what you guys are building? What is that?
We don't have that yet, but we're hyper-positioning it into being at the margins. And yeah, like it's just a sticker, right? Like it's a design, it's a symbol and an idea. And with my friend Welf, when we're working with, and who also is or was part of the company, he has been developing intellectual advances in that direction. And so I don't know, it's just I'm holding it up as an example of the kind of feel of working in this context that it has, because it's more kind of the nerds that also want to live good lives kind of thing. Then it is kind of, we have an intellectual project and we're now conquering the world with that project.
And that goes back to the cyberpunk thing, because the cyberpunk is just a bunch of nerds who are sort of like almost like they're caught up in their creations and have no ability to like think about them as tools and get turned into tools by the tool, which is happening to a lot of people with LLMs right now specifically. And so I think there is a way, and there is space for optimism. And it reminds me of sort of Marx and Ted Kaczynski. It feels like Ted Kaczynski is like the Marx of our current era, where it's like, yeah, he kind of gets the problem. He's mapped out the problem, but he also went like fully wrong about how to actually solve the problem in a way that destroys lives rather than creates new meaning and new life. And so going back to that thought where it's like we're in this third timeline, and I think in that third timeline, it's not going to be it's not going to be a dualistic like this or that. It's you guys are going to experiment. There's going to be a lot of people experimenting. Some of those things will work, but to your point, it might not be like the 1980s where it will work to the point where you have an Apple, and an Apple is just the biggest giant juggernaut in the corner, like doing all their things. Like the monopoly itself might not necessarily survive. The monopoly might be a sort of temporary ideology sort of thing that happened because of the Industrial Revolution and the nation states and such like that. We might be entering into very, very different territory, culturally speaking, that won't actually allow for those monopolies. Any thoughts there?
For sure. I think this is also where we have an interest in doing a different way of funding this work. And so right now, yes, we sell devices and we do so a little bit above cost. But one of the interesting things that Anjan, I think, has been maybe uniquely successful at, from at least the people that I know personally of who have started companies, is that he didn't, not necessarily because he didn't want to, but because they wouldn't fund him. He didn't take money from VCs or the typical institutional
Nice.
investors.
Yep.
Um, Partially because they just didn't understand the play. Like
Yeah.
it was very interesting actually. Like the individual people that he spoke to, they wanted the device and they could see how the device was valuable to them.
Yeah.
But the industry as a whole kind of said like nobody will like this will not be successful. Nobody
Yeah.
wants kind of
Yeah.
wholesome technology. Like
Yeah.
like the way that you build a technology company is by serving one of the seven sins. And
Yep.
and
Yeah.
so there's like deep cynicism about how
Yep.
to relate to humans and how to make a bug doing so. And so one of the uh, one of the ideas we have is to pursue a kind of Costco-like business model for the
Hmm.
company where you have a membership, and that membership,
Cool.
I don't know whether this will make, uh, I don't think this will mean that you won't have to pay for a device or anything, but like more a kind of a commons or commons like structure where
Mm.
there's a benefit that is intended to be produced by the people that care about that, and then there's an organization that is tasked with creating that benefit.
Mm.
And then every member who contributes to that shared mission, they get the proceeds of that work to some extent. And that can be like kind of services within that ecosystem, or it can be devices, it can be other things. But so we're exploring kind of alternate ways to make this work for the long term financially, that are less likely to degenerate into the kind of narrow serve the shareholders or serve the whims of the public financial markets, or other kind of
Mm.
problematic uh, problematic failure states or attractors where if you're not careful, these kind of structures will end up determining the trajectory of your evolution, and then also the way you fail to attain the outcome, or make good on the mission or progress towards the mission that you're actually there to achieve.
Yeah, I really like that. I love the fact that he didn't take VC money. I think we were just talking about the Industrial Revolution and sort of this monopoly capitalism nation state type of thing. And it feels like the whole VC, all of finance, all of current capitalism isn't necessarily capitalism anymore. It's not what all the theorists were talking about, because for the last 25 years, maybe longer, we've had negative to or zero, sometimes negative interest rates, because we have an empire who's basically got the dollar reserve, and so they're now doing these things that make sense to the empire, but also kind of hollow out the basis under which the empire grew. And so that's VC is not outside of that, and it's sort of like the incentive mechanism. And so they've become very short term, very destructive, like focusing on the seven sins as their business model. It's just like, really? Is that the creativity that we have? Is that like so I find it really hollow. And I think the where we're headed is interesting because it's the property rights. There's the property rights, which I think makes sense, and that's where we get equity. And I think startups make sense in the 1980s and the 1990s. It made sense to give people equity. But now I've been starting to track things around crypto, and I'm wondering how, like, are we going to have new mechanisms to get to that same equity, that outsized return because you own a property and there are laws that all kind of reflect that? Is there something like that in crypto that attracts you guys to setting that up, or what are you guys thinking about that?
I don't think we'll launch a token anytime soon, but
And I don't
um,
mean specifically
I
token.
know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I think I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, I studied a lot under Arthur Brock, and the kind of holochain world and the currency design ideas, and so I think of it more as a kind of a whole domain of design, and uh, that that has laws to it that you can obey and that you can
Yeah, yeah,
interestingly
yeah.
make
I
use
love
of
that.
to structure things. Um, and yeah, I don't know what we will do, but we'll definitely explore it. And I think we also have the possibility or the opportunity to like make small experiments and see how they work, and like do kind of brand within a brand type things, or things like that. Like for example, we might want to experiment for a particular product that we might want to launch with a kind of crowdfunding like
Mm, mm,
experience,
mm,
where
mm,
maybe that has aspects of that, and maybe we'll build up
mm.
institutional knowledge over time. But yeah, I think that that's definitely a worthy space for exploration for sure.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, there's so many interesting things that are coming up. Uh, um, so I've, are you, do you study John Vervaeke and his awakening from the meaning crisis? Sounds like affordances. I've heard a lot about affordances
I
and such. Yeah.
I listened to his original kind of long series, like when it came out. Yes,
The awake.
I haven't watched much of his in the recent year, but yeah,
Yeah, the awakening from the meaning crisis is a
yes.
sort of transformational program. Well, so we got about 5 to 10 minutes left. There is a lot of stuff we talked about. Um, what what is the coolest thing you guys are working on now that you're about to come out of? Well, we could talk more about the LLM thing too, because we didn't go too much into the LLMs, and I'm sure that's related to what you guys are working on, right?
Yeah, we plan to launch SolOS, which is kind of our modified Android OS later this year. We're kind of we were hoping to launch it at the beginning of this year or this spring, but we have to do some kind of foundational work first to put all the stuff that we prepared for the launch kind of on more solid ground. And it is quite interesting how intensive it can be to do a product across all of these dimensions and have them all work well together. And so it just is what it is. But yeah, that'll come out with with the reader, with possibly also we'll get into creating our own note-taking app,
Mm,
and then we'll go into the direction also of like a personal knowledge graph that exists on
mm.
the device that can attach to all kinds of different data in different places. Like there's all kinds of stuff we're exploring there. None of that is yet kind of specced out enough and committed to organizationally that we can really meaningfully talk about at this point, but there's lots of deep exploration that's already taking place. Um, and then, yeah, the AI feature that I talked about, where you can invoke it with that tap on the action button and then talk with it about the context
Mm,
on your screen. That will also come along with that. And then, yeah, there's maybe other things we can do. I think by that point and already now, the kind of on-device models
yeah,
should be
yeah.
smart and small enough that you can run something on it on the hardware that we have. Um, and so I think the voice interaction modality will be quite powerful for us. And where you'll be able to, I don't know, maybe you can ask it to set the brightness of your display. Like we do have you
Yeah,
actually have a
interesting.
backlight or yeah, or like say like, hey, take this as make a
Mm,
note about this and add it to my knowledge graph of whatever's on screen with the note of XYZ, like this is kind of the direction we would want to go.
very
Um,
interesting.
and then
Yeah, go for it.
go ahead.
Go for it.
And then uh, what I mentioned earlier, we're going to do this summer this campaign of Outdoor Computing Club. And so
Mm,
I'm really excited about that because um, I I think it could be a cool cultural moment if we succeed at inspiring other groups and people to contribute and participate in that, where kind of intellectuals, artists, regular people, knowledge workers, everybody really who feels inspired could kind of collectively and at the margins contribute to an overall buildup of shared knowledge about how to uh, live more of your life outside and not have that mean that you have to disconnect entirely from the technological life or digital life that you also live. And so this is an open question again. I think a thing we keep coming back to is like living in the generative question rather than having a final answer we intend
yeah,
to promulgate.
yeah.
And so I'm kind of thinking about how we do this campaign in a way that inspires that contribution. So I think I would like to have as the end point of that the distribution of kind of the learnings from that 3 months of exploration over the summer. Like we're
Uh-huh.
going to do 3 events in Europe, in I think in Amsterdam, Berlin, and in London,
Uh-huh.
and then we're going to do a series of events also in the United States. And then we definitely will want to inspire other people and groups to pick that theme up and share bring their friends out to the park on like Friday afternoon to finish off the workday, or like, hey, I figured out how to have my computer be on my porch and like it actually works well, or like kind of this sharing of ideas and knowledge, and then at the end distribute kind of a serve like a kind of an overview of that kind of knowledge, and hopefully then through that seed these local spaces or groups that can make use of that knowledge collectively. Like that's why it's a club, like auto computing club. Like we could imagine that people adopt this as a shared modality and then do something with it. So
Very cool. If you ever need somebody in Argentina, I would love to help out with that.
actually we have our designer, one of our designers lives in Argentina,
Oh,
so
great.
I'll connect you with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to meet them just regardless. So I want to buy one of these things. And it says I just looked on Perplexity, so I have to buy it from the site daylightcomputer.com, and then it does take a while. Do you guys do like a produce it once I buy it? Because it says June 2025 is when I could get it.
Right. Yeah, we're in the position of a small hardware startup, which means that we are very small manufacturing volume, which
Yeah,
means
yeah,
that we have to do it in kind of batches.
yeah.
And so
Got it. Yeah.
this has been I think the main frustration of people who bought it, that they received it only months and months later, depending on when they bought it.
I'm in
I
Argentina, so it
think
doesn't really matter because that's the way I buy everything now is that I have to wait for the right time to do it. Yeah.
I think over this year we should get to the point where you'll receive it within a week or 2 weeks. Um,
Cool.
and it depends on when you order. But yeah, right now when you order, you'll likely receive it towards end of June, maybe a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
at least as far as we can currently tell the manufacturing to go.
Great. And then there's one question I had about it. Okay, let me go back to my notes here. So one last thing was just as you were talking about the local models is funny. I'll share a little story. Hopefully, do you have to go at the hour, or are you good for a few
I can go
minutes?
a bit longer. Yeah.
So as soon as in 2020, in March 2020, I became a prepper very, very quickly from just living in the city. I was just like all of a sudden like, okay, it's apocalypse is happening. Let's just deal with it. We go move into the country. We'll become a prepper. And so one of the big things that I did at that time before LLMs was I downloaded all the YouTube videos I could find on how to live in the woods because I knew absolutely nothing about living in the woods. And so then as soon as LLMs came out, I was like, oh, I don't need to download the YouTube videos. I just use an LLM. And so I loved what you said about the on-device models. And it feels like I just had an insight, I think, which is that maybe even important for your company, which is that you have a small enough on-device model that's voice interactive. And I wonder how much of that will actually cut down on the computation cost itself of having this giant OS if you just have the LLM control the OS. Have you guys thought about that? Does that exist?
I, I'm not aware of any successful like AI first OSs at the
Mm-hmm.
moment. I know that people are exploring this space.
Do you
I
know
think the
anybody
issue,
I can interview who's exploring the space?
I'll think about that some more and ask around in the
Yeah,
team whether they know anybody. We have quite a large reach now into that space, so
yeah,
I'll be happy to do that.
yeah,
I think you still run into the issue of having like in OS is just so many different fundamental like
yeah, yeah,
computing
yeah,
things that
yeah.
even an LLM can't like on like the problem is it has to actually work.
Hmm.
And so the
And
vibe
100% of
coding,
the time too, not
yeah, the vibe coding thing is
99.9%.
not yet at the
Yeah,
point where like it's just that deterministic. So yeah.
brilliant. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. How can people find out about Daylight Computer?
They can go to the website, of course, theatcomputer.com, and then our largest presence is on X at the moment, and the second largest one is on Instagram. There is also a number of unofficial kind of Discords and Reddits and such. And so if you Google that or DuckDuckGo it or whatever, or Complexity, then you'll find those. And of course, you're welcome to also reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm happy to interact and yeah, we are a fairly open book in that sense. So always happy to talk.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much.